A distant hum filled the air, a sound that didn't belong. It resonated through the streets of Earth's last free city, a faint but unignorable tremor that made the ground seem alive. To anyone paying attention, it was the sound of inevitability. To those who refused to look away, it was a warning. "They're coming," a voice whispered, low but steady. The words belonged to an older man, his eyes clouded with both wisdom and fear. He stood on a crumbling balcony, gazing at the horizon. The once blue sky now held a metallic sheen, a reflection of the colossal ships that blotted out the sun. The Galactic Empire had arrived. For centuries, humanity had been an anomaly in the galaxy, a stubborn, defiant species that refused to fall in line. The Empire, a sprawling coalition of alien civilizations, had long prided itself on its ability to assimilate worlds without conflict. Yet Earth remained a thorn in its side, rejecting every overture, every demand, every ultimatum. And now, it seemed, the Empire had lost patience. In the city's central square, a makeshift council had gathered. Leaders from what remained of humanity's nations stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces drawn but resolute. There was no pomp or ceremony, no illusions of grandeur. They wore mismatched uniforms and patched clothing, a testament to years of scarcity and struggle. Yet their voices carried an unshakable conviction. "We will not pay tribute," said a woman with fiery red hair, her voice ringing out like a battle cry. "Not with our resources, not with our labor, and certainly not with our lives." Her words were met with murmurs of agreement, though fear lingered in the air like an unspoken question. How could they possibly resist? The Empire's technology was centuries ahead of theirs. Its fleet could obliterate entire continents in minutes, and yet, the alternative, subjugation, servitude, the erasure of their identity, was unthinkable. In a dimly lit room beneath the city, a group of engineers worked tirelessly. Their faces were smudged with grease, their hands calloused from endless labor. They were building something. A weapon, a shield, a miracle, though even they weren't entirely sure it would work. "If this fails, we're finished," one of them muttered, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "Then it won't fail," another replied, her tone sharp. "We've come too far to stop now." Far above, the Empire's emissaries prepared to make their landing. Their ships hovered like vultures, sleek and menacing, their hulls adorned with symbols of conquest. Inside one of the vessels, a figure stood in silence, watching Earth through a wide viewport. The emissary's features were alien yet eerily humanoid, its expression unreadable. "They will resist," an aide said, breaking the silence. "Of course they will," the emissary replied. Its voice was calm, almost amused. "But resistance is irrelevant. The outcome is already decided." Back on Earth, a young soldier stood guard at the city's edge, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. He was barely old enough to remember a time before the war, before the constant threat of invasion. Yet he stood with a determination that belied his years. He had heard the stories of Earth's defiance, of humanity's refusal to bow, and he believed in them. He had to. As night fell, the city prepared for the inevitable. Families huddled together in underground shelters, whispering prayers to gods they weren't sure were listening. Fighters checked their weapons, their movements mechanical and purposeful. And above it all, the Empire's ships loomed, their lights casting eerie shadows across the landscape. When the first ultimatum came, it was broadcast across every frequency, every screen. The emissary's face appeared, its expression unreadable, but its message clear. "People of Earth," it began, its voice smooth and authoritative. "Your defiance has been noted. Your resistance, admirable but futile, will end tonight. Surrender, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will face annihilation. The choice is yours." In the council chamber, the red-haired woman stood once more. She looked around at the faces of her comrades, searching for doubt, for fear. But what she saw was something else entirely, a quiet, steely resolve. "We've made our choice," she said, her voice steady. "No tribute will be paid." As the signal cut out, the room fell silent. Outside, the hum of the Empire's ships grew louder, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very earth. The first beams of light streaked across the sky, their targets unknown, but their intent unmistakable. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a single flare shot upward from the city's heart. It was a signal, a call to arms, a defiant cry that echoed across the heavens. Humanity had made its stand. The battle for Earth had begun. The flare's light hung in the night sky for a moment before fading. But its message lingered. Across the city, people stirred from their places of refuge. Faces turned upward in awe and fear. The flare was not just a signal. It was a declaration. It was hope, fragile and defiant, in the face of an overwhelming enemy. The people of Earth braced themselves, knowing that what lay ahead would test their resolve, their ingenuity, and their unity. Underground, in the labyrinthine halls of the Resistance's command center, the red-haired woman paced. She was known to many as Commander, but her given name had been lost to history. She stopped in front of a table cluttered with maps, schematics, and a flickering holographic display. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the engineers, strategists, and fighters who worked tirelessly to prepare for the onslaught. "Status report," she demanded, her voice cutting through the din. A younger man, his face pale but determined, stepped forward. "The EMP charges are ready. We've deployed them in key locations around the city. They should disrupt the Empire's initial assault." "Should," she repeated, her tone skeptical. "We don't have room for should. Either they work or we're done." He nodded, swallowing hard. "They'll work." Nearby, a group of technicians huddled around a console, monitoring the Empire's movements. The alien ships were massive, each one bristling with weapons and surrounded by smaller craft that darted around like insects. The technicians spoke in hushed tones, their screens displaying streams of data that painted a grim picture. "They're positioning themselves for a ground assault," one of them said. "They're sending landing craft to the outskirts. They'll try to surround us," the commander said, stepping closer. "But they underestimate us. They always have." Outside the city, in the shadow of an ancient forest, a small group of scouts lay hidden among the trees. They watched as the Empire's landing craft descended, their engines glowing with an otherworldly light. The scouts spoke in whispers, their breath visible in the cold night air. "There's too many of them," one said, his voice tinged with fear. "It doesn't matter," another replied. "We're not here to fight, just to watch, to report." But even as they spoke, the Empire's forces began to emerge. Alien soldiers, clad in sleek armor and armed with weapons that seemed to hum with energy, moved with precision and purpose. The scouts froze, their hearts pounding as they watched the invaders spread out, their movements efficient and calculated. Back in the city, the young soldier at the edge of the defensive line tightened his grip on his rifle. He could see the faint glow of the landing craft in the distance, could hear the distant thrum of their engines. He glanced at the people around him. Farmers, teachers, mechanics, all turned fighters by necessity. Their faces were pale but determined, their eyes reflecting the same resolve that burned in his own. The night stretched on, the tension growing with each passing moment. And then, at last, the first explosion shattered the silence. The EMP charges detonated in a cascade of light and sound, sending shockwaves through the air. The Empire's ships faltered, their lights flickering as systems shorted out. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the impossible had been achieved, but the moment was fleeting. The Empire's forces adjusted, their superior technology compensating for the disruption. The battle had begun in earnest, and it was clear that the fight would be long and brutal. As the city erupted into chaos, the commander stood at the heart of the resistance, her voice cutting through the noise as she issued orders. "Hold the line," she commanded. "No matter what, we hold the line." And so, Humanity stood against the Galactic Empire, their defiance a beacon in the darkness. The battle raged on, each moment a test of their strength, their courage, and their unyielding spirit. And though the outcome remained uncertain, one thing was clear: Earth would not fall without a fight. The air was thick with smoke and ash, the remnants of buildings and machines blending into a haze that seemed to choke the city itself. Explosions rippled through the streets, each one a grim reminder of how close humanity was to the brink. The Empire's forces moved with relentless precision, their metallic armor reflecting the flames that licked at the ruins of Earth's last stronghold. For every alien soldier that fell, it seemed another two took their place, advancing steadily, unyieldingly. In the command center, the commander's voice carried above the chaos, a lifeline for those fighting to hold the line. Her once fiery hair was now streaked with soot, her face drawn tight with determination and exhaustion. She pored over the holographic maps, her fingers tracing the movements of enemy troops, as if sheer will alone could slow them down. "We're running out of time," said the young man who had delivered the status report earlier. His voice cracked under the weight of his words, but he stood firm, his gaze fixed on the commander. "Not yet," she replied, her tone sharper than she intended. "We hold them here. We've survived worse." Her words were met with silence. They all knew the truth. This wasn't like the skirmishes of the past. This was something far greater, far more devastating. And yet, no one dared voice their doubts. To do so would be to surrender, and surrender was not an option. On the front lines, the young soldier gritted his teeth as he aimed his rifle at the advancing alien troops. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to focus, to breathe. He'd been trained for this, though no amount of training could prepare anyone for the sheer terror of facing an enemy so vastly superior. Around him, his comrades shouted orders, fired their weapons, and fell in battle. The air was filled with the acrid scent of burning metal and the cries of the wounded. Above the battlefield, the Empire's ships began to shift their formation. They moved with an eerie synchronicity, their sleek hulls glowing as they prepared to unleash another wave of destruction. The city's makeshift defenses strained under the assault, their shields flickering as they absorbed the relentless energy blasts. In the command center, alarms blared as technicians scrambled to keep the systems online. "They're concentrating their fire on the western quadrant," one of them called out. "If they break through, the city's done for." "Divert power to the shields," the commander ordered, her voice cutting through the din. "And get those artillery units into position. We need to push them back." As the technicians worked frantically to carry out her orders, the ground beneath the city trembled. The Empire's forces had brought in heavy artillery of their own, massive machines that towered over the battlefield, their cannons capable of leveling entire blocks with a single shot. The sight of them was enough to make even the bravest fighters falter. In the underground bunker where the engineers worked, the tension was palpable. The room was filled with the hum of machinery, the crackle of static, and the murmured calculations of minds racing against the clock. The device they had been building, their last, desperate hope, was nearly complete. It was untested, unproven, and utterly experimental. But it was all they had. "We need more time," one of them said, her voice trembling as she adjusted a panel. "If we activate it now, there's no telling what will happen." "We don't have time," another replied, his tone grim. "If we wait, there won't be anything left to save." The debate was cut short by a deafening explosion that shook the bunker, sending dust raining from the ceiling. The engineers exchanged glances, their fear mirrored in each other's eyes. They knew the time for debate was over. Above ground, the young soldier's heart pounded as he watched one of the massive alien machines lumber closer. Its cannon swiveled toward his position, and for a moment he felt paralyzed. Then a voice crackled through his earpiece, the commander's voice, steady and unwavering. "Hold your ground," she said. "Reinforcements are coming." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Around him, his comrades rallied, their resolve hardening despite the odds. They opened fire, their weapons lighting up the night as they poured everything they had into stopping the machine's advance. The air was filled with the deafening roar of gunfire and the sharp crackle of energy weapons. In the skies above, a small fleet of human ships appeared, their engines blazing as they dove into the fray. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They targeted the Empire's ships, weaving through the enemy formation and unleashing volleys of missiles and plasma fire. For a moment, it seemed as though the tide might turn, but the Empire was relentless. Their ships responded with devastating precision, their weapons cutting through the human fleet like a knife through paper. One by one, the human ships fell, their fiery remains raining down on the battlefield below. Back in the command center, the commander watched the carnage unfold, her fists clenched at her sides. She refused to look away, refused to let herself feel the despair that threatened to consume her. Instead, she focused on the maps, the data, the tiny glimmers of hope that remained. "We're not done yet," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "We still have one shot." As the battle raged on, the engineers in the bunker completed their final preparations. The device was ready, its core glowing with an otherworldly light. They stood back, their faces pale but determined, as their leader placed her hand on the activation switch. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's hope it's enough." The tension in the room was palpable as she pressed the switch. The device hummed to life, its energy building to a crescendo. Above ground, the fighters and civilians alike felt a strange vibration in the air, a sensation that was both foreign and familiar. The Empire's forces hesitated, their movements faltering as they sensed the shift. And then, in a blinding flash of light, everything changed. The light from the device surged upward, cutting through the ash-laden skies and halting the Empire's advance. For a brief moment, silence reigned. The alien forces froze, their synchronized movements faltering, as if something unseen had reached into their collective consciousness and severed the threads binding them together. The humans on the battlefield watched in awe, their battered spirits momentarily buoyed by the spectacle. But the relief was short-lived. From the horizon, a rumble began to rise, low and ominous, growing louder with each passing second. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air seemed to crackle with anticipation. The commander, still at her station in the command center, turned her eyes to the holographic display. A new reading was emerging, one that filled the room with a palpable dread. "What is it?" she demanded, her voice sharp. A technician turned to her, his face pale. "It's something massive, something we've never seen before, heading straight for us." The commander's eyes narrowed as she studied the display. The readings didn't make sense. Whatever was approaching wasn't just another fleet or ground force. It was something far larger, its energy signature unlike anything they had encountered. She tapped into the surveillance drones, directing them toward the source. The images that appeared on the screen were almost incomprehensible. A colossal vessel, easily dwarfing the Empire's warships, loomed in the distance. Its surface pulsed with shifting patterns of light, as if it were alive, and its shape defied conventional design, an amalgamation of technology and organic material. The Empire's troops seemed as stunned as the humans, their movements erratic as the massive entity approached. "Is it one of theirs?" someone asked, breaking the uneasy silence. "No," the commander replied, her voice tinged with unease. "It's not, and that's what worries me." The young soldier on the front line stared at the sky, his heart pounding in his chest. The massive ship cast a shadow over the battlefield, its sheer size enough to blot out the distant sunlight. Around him, his comrades exchanged nervous glances, their earlier hope now replaced with uncertainty. Even the Empire's machines, so relentless and unyielding moments before, seemed to hesitate. A deep, resonant hum emanated from the vessel, sending ripples through the air. It wasn't just sound. It was something deeper, something that seemed to reach into their very minds. The young soldier clutched his head as a wave of dizziness washed over him. He wasn't alone. Across the battlefield, humans and aliens alike staggered under the strange influence. Back in the bunker, the engineers struggled to stabilize the device. The energy it had released was immense, but it had also drawn the attention of something far beyond their comprehension. The lead engineer slammed her fist against the console, frustration etched across her face. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she muttered. "We didn't account for this. What do we do?" Another asked, his voice trembling. She hesitated, her mind racing. Shutting down the device might stop the signal, but it could also leave them defenseless against the Empire. Letting it continue could attract even greater dangers. It was a gamble either way, and the weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical force. Above ground, the alien vessel finally came to a halt. Its surface shifted and changed, forming what appeared to be massive apertures. Beams of light shot down from these openings, striking the ground with pinpoint precision. Where they landed, both human and alien fighters vanished without a trace. Panic erupted as everyone scrambled for cover, their earlier animosity momentarily forgotten in the face of this new threat. "Commander," a voice crackled through the comms. "We're being scanned. The ship's targeting us." The commander's jaw tightened. "All units, fall back to the inner perimeter. We need to regroup." As the troops retreated, the young soldier found himself caught in the chaos. He dragged a wounded comrade to safety, his heart pounding as the beams of light continued to strike around them. The ground where they had been moments before was now a smooth, glassy surface, devoid of any trace of life. In the command center, the screens flickered as the strange vessel's energy interfered with their systems. The commander gripped the edge of the console, her mind racing. This was no longer just a battle against the Empire. It was something far more dangerous, something that threatened to wipe them all out, regardless of allegiance. "Get me a line to the Empire's command ship," she ordered. The room fell silent as her team processed her words. Finally, one of the technicians nodded, his hands moving quickly over the controls. Moments later, the alien commander's image appeared on the main screen. His expression was inscrutable, his alien features calm despite the chaos. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cold and measured. "You tell me," the commander shot back. "That thing out there, is it yours?" The alien commander's eyes narrowed. "No, it is not of the Empire, and it is not of your world. It is something else." The tension between them was palpable, but for the first time, there was a flicker of understanding. Whatever this new entity was, it posed a threat to them both. The commander took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "Then we need to work together," she said, "because if we don't, none of us are getting out of this alive." The alien commander studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. "Agreed. But know this, human. Once this is over, our war continues." "Fair enough," she replied. "Let's just make sure there's still a war to fight." As the uneasy alliance took shape, the strange vessel began to emit a new sound, a low rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate with the very core of the planet. The air grew heavy, and an unnatural darkness began to spread across the battlefield. The stakes had never been higher, and the final confrontation was just beginning. Suddenly, the rhythmic pulse shifted into something more erratic, sending shockwaves through the ground and knocking soldiers from their feet. Both human and alien forces scrambled to understand the new development. The ship's apertures began to widen, revealing swirling patterns of light and shadow within. From the depths of these openings, smaller, almost insect-like vessels began to emerge, their movements quick and chaotic. One of the human technicians shouted, "We're detecting multiple life signatures, non-humanoid." In the bunker, the engineers' monitors lit up with streams of incomprehensible data. "It's adapting," one of them said, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's learning from our systems. This isn't just a ship. It's alive." The commander clenched her fists. "Alive or not, It can be stopped. Patch me through to all units." Her voice rang out across the battlefield. "This is your commander. We're not fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for everything. Hold the line. Protect the engineers. And remember, we're humanity's last hope." As her words echoed through the chaos, the young soldier tightened his grip on his weapon. Around him, his comrades rallied, their fear giving way to a fierce determination. The insect-like vessels swarmed the battlefield, but the combined human and alien forces met them head-on, their newfound alliance holding fast against the onslaught. Above it all, the massive vessel continued to shift and change, its patterns growing more complex, more inscrutable. Whatever its purpose, it was clear that it was far from finished. And as the commander watched from the command center, she knew that the greatest challenge was still to come. The battlefield was chaos. The combined human and alien forces fought side by side against the swarms of insect-like vessels spilling from the colossal ship. Beams of light from the strange apertures tore through the skies, scattering debris and engulfing soldiers in bursts of energy. Despite the odds, the Alliance held, their desperate unity the only shield against annihilation. In the command center, the commander watched the live feeds with a mix of awe and dread. The engineers had pushed the device to its limits, using it to jam the alien ship's strange signals, but it was clear that their efforts were a temporary reprieve. The ship's living surface was adapting faster than they could counteract, shifting and evolving with every pulse of energy it emitted. The commander clenched her fists. They were running out of time. "Status on the device," she demanded. "It's still holding," one of the engineers replied, his voice strained. "But not for long. If we can't stabilize the energy output, it's going to overload. Then we'll have to use it before that happens," she said firmly. "Prepare for a full discharge. Target the ship's core. Commander, if we do that, there's no guarantee we'll survive the blast," the engineer warned. "And if we don't, we won't survive at all," she countered. "Make it happen." Outside, the young soldier fought desperately to hold the line. The insect-like vessels moved with terrifying speed, their jagged appendages slicing through armor and flesh alike. He had lost count of how many comrades he'd seen fall, their sacrifices fueling his determination. As he reloaded his weapon, he glanced toward the horizon and saw the ship's massive apertures shifting again. This time, the pattern seemed more focused, more deliberate. A voice crackled through his earpiece. "This is the commander. All units, fall back immediately. We're initiating a full discharge of the device. Repeat, fall back now." The soldier hesitated, looking at the wounded comrade he'd been dragging to safety. Gritting his teeth, he hoisted the injured man onto his shoulders and began to retreat, his legs burning with the effort. Around him, other soldiers did the same, their movements frantic as the battlefield erupted in renewed chaos. In the bunker, the engineers worked frantically to stabilize the device for its final activation. The lead engineer's hands flew over the controls, sweat dripping down her face. "We're almost there," she muttered. "Just a few more adjustments." Suddenly, the screens flickered, and a new signal appeared. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger with each passing second. The lead engineer froze, her eyes widening as she realized what she was seeing. "Commander," she said, her voice shaking. "The ship, it's not just adapting. It's communicating." The commander's head snapped toward her. "What do you mean?" "It's sending out a message," the engineer replied. "It's trying to talk to us." The room fell silent as everyone processed her words. The commander's mind raced. Could this be a trap, or was there a chance, however slim, that they could reason with it? "Patch it through," she said finally. "Let's hear what it has to say." The signal crackled through the speakers, a series of strange, otherworldly tones that seemed to resonate deep within their minds. Slowly, the tones began to shift, forming words in a voice that was both alien and eerily human. "You are resilient," the voice said, "a quality we did not anticipate." The commander stepped closer to the console. "Who are you? What do you want?" "We are beyond your understanding," the voice replied. "Our purpose is evolution. Your conflict is irrelevant. We seek to integrate." "Integrate," the commander repeated, her heart sinking. "You mean consume." "If necessary," the voice admitted. "But your resistance has intrigued us. Perhaps there is another way." The room was silent, the tension palpable. The commander's mind raced. Was this a genuine offer or a ploy to buy time? She glanced at the countdown on the device. They had less than 2 minutes before the full discharge. Above it all, the massive vessel continued to shift and change, its patterns growing more complex, more inscrutable. Whatever its purpose, it was clear that it was far from finished. And as the commander watched from the command center, she knew that the greatest challenge was still to come. The battlefield was chaos. The combined human and alien forces fought side by side against the swarms of insect-like vessels spilling from the colossal ship. Beams of light from the strange apertures tore through the skies, scattering debris and engulfing soldiers in bursts of energy. Despite the odds, the Alliance held, their desperate unity the only shield against annihilation. In the command center, the commander watched the live feeds with a mix of awe and dread. The engineers had pushed the device to its limits, using it to jam the alien ship's strange signals, but it was clear that their efforts were a temporary reprieve. The ship's living surface was adapting faster than they could counteract, shifting and evolving with every pulse of energy it emitted. The commander clenched her fists. They were running out of time. "Status on the device," she demanded. "It's still holding," one of the engineers replied, his voice strained. "But not for long. If we can't stabilize the energy output, it's going to overload. Then we'll have to use it before that happens," she said firmly. "Prepare for a full discharge. Target the ship's core. Commander, if we do that, there's no guarantee we'll survive the blast," the engineer warned. "And if we don't, we won't survive at all," she countered. "Make it happen." Outside, the young soldier fought desperately to hold the line. The insect-like vessels moved with terrifying speed, their jagged appendages slicing through armor and flesh alike. He had lost count of how many comrades he'd seen fall, their sacrifices fueling his determination. As he reloaded his weapon, he glanced toward the horizon and saw the ship's massive apertures shifting again. This time, the pattern seemed more focused, more deliberate. A voice crackled through his earpiece. "This is the commander. All units, fall back immediately. We're initiating a full discharge of the device. Repeat, fall back now." The soldier hesitated, looking at the wounded comrade he'd been dragging to safety. Gritting his teeth, he hoisted the injured man onto his shoulders and began to retreat, his legs burning with the effort. Around him, other soldiers did the same, their movements frantic as the battlefield erupted in renewed chaos. In the bunker, the engineers worked frantically to stabilize the device for its final activation. The lead engineer's hands flew over the controls, sweat dripping down her face. "We're almost there," she muttered. "Just a few more adjustments." Suddenly, the screens flickered and a new signal appeared. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger with each passing second. The lead engineer froze, her eyes widening as she realized what she was seeing. "Commander," she said, her voice shaking. "The ship, it's not just adapting. It's communicating." The commander's head snapped toward her. "What do you mean?" "It's sending out a message," the engineer replied. "It's trying to talk to us." The room fell silent as everyone processed her words. The commander's mind raced. Could this be a trap? Or was there a chance, however slim, that they could reason with it? "Patch it through," she said finally. "Let's hear what it has to say." The signal crackled through the speakers, a series of strange, otherworldly tones that seemed to resonate deep within their minds. Slowly, the tones began to shift, forming words in a voice that was both alien and eerily human. "You are Resilient, the voice said. A quality we did not anticipate. The commander stepped closer to the console. Who are you? What do you want? We are beyond your understanding, the voice replied. Our purpose is evolution. Your conflict is irrelevant. We seek to integrate. Integrate, the commander repeated, her heart sinking. You mean consume. If necessary, the voice admitted. But your resistance has intrigued us. Perhaps there is another way. The room was silent, the tension palpable. The commander's mind raced. Was this a genuine offer or a ploy to buy time? She glanced at the countdown on the device. They had less than 2 minutes before the full discharge. And what would this other way entail? She asked cautiously. Cooperation, the voice said. Exchange of knowledge. Mutual growth. Your choice determines your fate. The young soldier, still carrying his wounded comrade, reached the perimeter just as the sky lit up with a blinding light. He shielded his eyes, his heart pounding as he looked back toward the ship. The massive apertures were glowing, their energy building to what seemed like a final catastrophic release. In the command center, the commander made her decision. Stop the discharge, she ordered. Commander, are you sure? The lead engineer asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Do it, the commander said firmly. If there's even a chance we can end this without destroying ourselves, we have to take it. The engineers scrambled to halt the countdown, their hands moving in a blur over the controls. The device powered down just as the ship's energy reached its peak. For a moment, the battlefield was silent, the tension almost unbearable. Then, slowly, the ship's apertures began to close. The insect-like vessels retreated, their movements less frantic, more deliberate. The massive entity seemed to withdraw, its surface shifting back to a more neutral state. You have chosen wisely, the voice said. The path forward will not be easy, but it is possible. As the ship began to ascend, its massive form disappearing into the clouds, the humans and aliens on the battlefield stood in stunned silence. The war was far from over, but in that moment they had achieved something greater than victory. They had found a reason to hope. The young soldier lowered his comrade to the ground, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Around him, his comrades began to cheer, their relief palpable. But as he looked toward the horizon, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The ship's parting words echoed in his mind, a reminder that their struggle was far from over. In the command center, the commander stood in silence, her eyes fixed on the empty sky. She had made a choice, one that would shape the future of humanity. Whether it was the right choice, only time would tell. But for now, they had survived. And sometimes, that was enough. As the ship disappeared into the atmosphere, the world seemed to pause. The silence that followed felt almost surreal after the chaos of the battle. Soldiers on the ground stared at one another, unsure whether to celebrate or brace for another attack. Slowly, the realization settled in. The fighting had stopped, at least for now. The young soldier slumped to the ground, exhaustion overtaking him. His wounded comrade gave a faint smile, gratitude shining in his eyes. Around them, medics moved quickly, tending to the injured. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and ozone, but there was a strange calm in the aftermath. In the command center, the tension finally eased as the screens went dark. The commander stood at the center of the room, her shoulders heavy with the weight of her decisions. She took a deep breath, her mind racing with what needed to be done next. The battle might be over, but the war for survival and understanding was just beginning. Send out a message to all units, she said. Let them know to regroup and begin recovery operations. And get me a secure line to the Galactic Council. We need to discuss what just happened. The engineers nodded and got to work. The room buzzed with quiet activity as the commander stared out the window, her eyes scanning the horizon. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed a threshold into something far bigger than they could comprehend. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Soldiers and civilians worked side by side to rebuild what had been destroyed. Temporary shelters were erected for those who had lost their homes, and relief supplies were distributed as quickly as they could be brought in. The sight of humans and aliens working together was a testament to what they had accomplished, but it also served as a reminder of how fragile their unity was. The Galactic Council convened in an emergency session to discuss the encounter. Representatives from various species debated fiercely, their voices echoing through the Grand Chamber. Some argued that the ship's retreat was a sign of weakness and that they should strike while they had the chance. Others cautioned against provoking an entity so powerful and enigmatic. The commander was invited to speak, her presence a rare occurrence in such a high-level meeting. "We don't fully understand what we're dealing with," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "But I believe the ship's offer of cooperation was genuine. It saw something in us that it didn't expect. Our resilience, our ability to unite against a common threat. We need to approach this carefully, with both caution and hope." Her words sparked a heated discussion, but eventually, a consensus was reached. They would attempt to establish communication with the ship, using the data they had gathered during the battle. It was a risky move, but one that could potentially lead to a better understanding of the entity and its motives. Meanwhile, on Earth, the young soldier found himself struggling to adjust to life after the battle. The memories of what he had seen and done haunted him, and he often found himself staring at the horizon, wondering if the ship would return. One evening, as he sat alone by a makeshift fire, he was approached by one of the alien soldiers he had fought alongside. The alien's angular features softened as it sat down beside him, its presence oddly comforting. "You fought bravely," the alien said, its voice a low rumble. "Your people have earned my respect." The soldier nodded, unsure how to respond. After a moment, he said, "Do you think it will come back?" The alien tilted its head, considering the question. "Perhaps, but if it does, we will be ready. Together." The days turned into weeks, and then months. Slowly, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The scars of the battle remained, but they were a reminder of what had been overcome. The effort to communicate with the ship continued, led by a team of scientists and linguists from across the galaxy. They analyzed the signals it had sent, searching for patterns and meanings. One day, a breakthrough came. A faint signal was detected, originating from deep space. It was similar to the one they had heard during the battle, but more complex, more deliberate. The team worked tirelessly to decode it, and when they finally succeeded, they were stunned by what they found. The message was a map, a set of coordinates leading to a distant star system. The discovery sparked a new wave of debate. Some saw it as an invitation, a chance to learn more about the ship and its intentions. Others feared it was a trap, a lure to draw them into a confrontation they couldn't win. After much deliberation, it was decided that a small, carefully chosen delegation would follow the coordinates. The mission would be one of exploration and diplomacy, but also caution. The young soldier was among those selected for the mission, his bravery during the battle earning him a place on the team. As the ship prepared to depart, he stood on the deck, looking out at the stars. He felt a mix of excitement and apprehension, knowing that this journey could change everything. The ship's journey was long and fraught with challenges. They encountered strange phenomena and navigated treacherous regions of space, their resolve tested at every turn. But finally, they reached their destination, a star system unlike any they had ever seen. At its center was a massive structure, its design eerily similar to the ship they had faced on Earth. As they approached, a signal came through, clear and strong. "Welcome," the voice said. "You have taken the first step." The delegation exchanged wary glances but pressed forward. They docked with the structure and were greeted by a holographic representation of the entity they had spoken to during the battle. It explained that it was part of a collective, a vast network of entities that sought to guide and protect emerging civilizations. Their methods, it admitted, were often harsh, but they were driven by a desire to ensure the survival of life in the universe. The young soldier listened intently, his mind racing with questions. When it was his turn to speak, he asked, "Why did you attack us? Why not just come to us in peace?" The hologram's expression shifted, almost as if it felt regret. "We misjudged you," it said. "We believed you were not yet ready. Your resilience proved us wrong." The delegation spent days on the structure, learning from the entity and sharing their own knowledge. Slowly, a tentative understanding began to form. When they finally returned to Earth, they'd brought with them not just knowledge, but a sense of hope. The encounter had shown them that the universe was far more complex and interconnected than they had ever imagined. Back on Earth, the commander received the delegation's report with a mixture of relief and determination. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was one they would face together. Humanity had stood against the Galactic Empire and faced an even greater threat. They had proven their strength, their unity, and their capacity for growth. As the young soldier looked up at the night sky, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. The stars no longer seemed distant and cold. They were a reminder of what they had overcome and of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The story of humanity was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.